It is basically the hierarchy in an organization put in a form of a flow diagram or a flow line or control line, something like that. That's what we're going to try to achieve in today's lecture. We're going to study how the structure varies from different organization as well as different functions, as well as in the government sector as well as in a private sector, right? So this is typically the organization. So I read out the organizational structure is just like formal reporting relationship in the form of authority or responsibility, or basically it is a hierarchy level, and also it has something called span of managerial control or span of management. So that is like number of people report to a particular seniority or something like that. So that's typically the organizational structure. Let's take a look at some of the organizational structure in private sector as well as in public sector. So this is the government department. This is Ministry of Construction and Information Technology. It has got Ministry of State for Communication and IT, and so was like the Ministry of States in Communication and IT. Then they've got a secretary, which is the chairman or the Postal Service Board or Director General, Department of Post, or something like that. And then you can see there are different members underneath them, like the members from personnel, operation, technology, then even insurance and other related stuffs, and human resource development, and then like again the planning and financial advisor and so on. So underneath them, there are a lot of people. CGM is Chief General Manager, like CGM is Chief General Manager, and DD is Deputy Director General, and GMS General Manager. So that's the abbreviation given here, right? There are different things you can really correlate this. Probably you can take a look at any organizational structure, like any organization. They have a broad overview of their members listed in form of a flow line or something like that. That's for organization structure. This is typically the public sector or government sector. And a similar notation is also present in the private sector as well. In the private sector, they have got its own designations and so on, right? So chairman, general manager, or even CEO at the top, then all the managers underneath that, something like that, right? Right. That's basically the private sector, right? And then there's something called quasi-government sector. Quasi means semi. It is not purely 100% public sector, but an allied or autonomous body managed by the government in a percentage terms. Like they don't manage 100 percentage. If it is 100 percentage, then it's called public sector. But if it is managed by 50 percentage or 75 percentage, then it is just like partly private or partly autonomous body, and rest of the that will be a public sector or the entity governed or controlled by the government or something. Right, so this is typically the quasi-government departments, in which they have got the outsourced partners, which is the private sector or any agency other than the government agency. So this is how it is pretty much different from the conventional public sector or like hierarchy of a public sector. Right? And then it has got a lot of things like interior graphic. This is something related to wholesome. PWD or something like that. Like they have good architectural department, structural department, electrical, mechanical, and Q&A, quality assurance and quality control, supervision and tenders. We'll be looking into tenders in tomorrow's lecture. We talk about bidding and tenders, which is partly a module number 3, but then we'll focus primarily on the tender or bidding nature. And then we'll focus on a game, a card game, where we can make use of that idea for, um, learning the tendering process or bidding process on it. And then all these things like CAD designers, like project managers and supervisors, all these things are, a kind of a public sector, but like the outsourced partners and ventures and administration departments and IT department from the other side. For example, in a PWD, person who was got skilled in computers were pretty, I mean, in terms of networking, computer networks and something like that were pretty limited. So we generally outsource it, like we give it to an agency who can manage the particular thing. Um, but all other things like the planning, then the CAD diagrams, then electrical works and structural drawings, and all can be done by the members or the the persons, personals, in fact, right? So that is typically the quasi-government department. Let's take a look at the contractors. A very important thing in construction or any project management is contracting or subcontracting, right? So why do we go for contractors? That one thing is we can give it to some specialized people. Like for example, if you want to host a birthday function, then probably you can get cake from a cake vendor, then all the arrangements of the food from the food or culinary vendors or something like that, right? So why not you can make on your own? So the reason is that one, you can get the professional expertise. The next is they have a skilled labor so that they can achieve the job within stipulated time and optimal cost. That's the point number two. So that's why we generally go for contracting. Otherwise, we can do anything our the way in which we can do, right? Right. So one important thing is the time bound. So the projects are time bound. So you can do a good job, but if you take a lot of time, then that's gonna be a waste, right? So you can give contracting so that your job gets done not only in a professional or in a skilled way, but also within the time frame. So that's what basically means by contracting. And contractors are generally in those days were only public contractors, where the contractors or from the government side they do projects pertaining to government. Since the size of the other buildings are pretty limited, probably I'm talking about 1950s and 60s, not much, private contractors. But as the time progresses, the type of construction built by private sector itself is very big now, or more complex, and it's almost kind of a pretty, complex stuff. So in that case, not only private contractors bid, but also, I mean, not only public contractors bid, but also the private contractors bid. That's how the origin of private contractor comes. In 1990s, during that particular period of time, the private contractors becoming more versatile. They took even government projects as well. Like the private companies like L&T and all have got very good contract mechanisms or people, as well as the the documentation and so on. So they get a lot of understanding or a lot of you know uh, it is something like more valiant than public contractors or something. So that's how the birth of private contractors come. And then even nowadays, given government projects like the Statue of Unity and all were done by the private contractors, something like that. And there's something called subcontracting, or just like outsourcing it. Like not a single contractor can do all the job, so he can go for subcontracting or something like that. So subcontracting is debatable. The reason is that it might provide very meager quality the output, but some people they feel that more number of other agencies also, I mean specialized agencies, join together in a bigger organization, then the quality can go up. This is always debatable. Like if you have a subcontracting, it might go down or the quality can go up or something. It's all about how the general contractor, which is the prime contractor, does that, right? Those days, general contractors were only public contractors, but now we have got private contractors as well. That's a very important fact. In a layman sense, this is just like a person. A contract is just a person, but it's not a person. It's a group of people or a company. But then, in a layman sense, it's just referred to a person who can do the job for another person according to his or her own processes and method, which is the skill. Here they talk about skill here. The contractor is not subjected to another control except what is specified in a mutual or a binding agreement, right? So this is very important. Contract, the legal term, whereas the non-contractual things are not legal, and which means like the word of mouth, we just say we just hire a mason to construct a compound wall. That's not a contract. But if you provide a legal forum, legal form, so that if you don't do it in stipulated time, then you'll be penalized, or if you finish it early, you'll be complimented or something like that. So those things, if you process in a paper, in a form, and that is pretty much a contract, and that becomes illegal, right? So small scale constructions may not have a good contract facilities, but for higher heavy constructions, generally the MNCs or the bigger companies, they prefer contract terms. They view that very seriously also. One incident, like one bigger company in our country, they get a project outside India, say during not now, before pandemic. I mean, that is something like 10 years before, and say a Gulf country, and they wanted to construct a stadium, a steel structure stadium there, right? And the estimator who's involved in that particular project forget, to include a component, right? So which is also mandatory. He forgets uh, to include that while shipping, right? So the cargo went via sea from India, some port from India to the Gulf, and then they find that at the end, receiving end, they find that that important component is missing, right? And their contractual term is that, like, a cargo, one cargo has a particular length to accommodate all that things should be sent in case any materials to be transported, but one component is missing, and that component is not even very big, right? And then the company at the end, which is the client, sued the company, and they say they want the component at any cost, right? So the contractual term says that a cargo of that particular length has to be used for transportation, right, of materials from India to that particular thing. And then you see, because of the contractual term, the company which is responsible for the fabrication and also the design or something like that, have to send only one component, that missing component, in the same container length, which is void of empty spaces. The cost of sending that, it's kind of a double the cost now, because of a simple minor mistake. They cost a huge something like that. So this is typically a very important thing. So these are real, incidents narrated by some of my friends who worked in construction companies. So, but loss is a loss, but then, like, it's a contractual term, right? So you cannot deviate from the contract. If you deviate that from the contractual term, then that's a violation, and that will be viewed even more seriously, right? So maybe the company might occur, huge upset because of the component missing. But then it's a learning experience for them also. Maybe they might be in a middle term or in the verge of becoming a MNC or something like that. But mistake is mistake. So contractual term will be really important. So that's why people value contract are very important. And this is simply the contract and contractual terms. There are different types of contractors. Actually, even there are 5 to 6 types of contractors, but you can put them under 3 categories. One is called petty contractor, or a group of small contractors. You can call petty contractors. They're a single person. Like, probably if you want to have alteration in your house, you don't have a contractor from a bigger firm, but instead you can request a nearby local contractor. This is petty contractors, and they only supply labor. So it's like a manpower thing. You just give them materials, and then they start doing the work. And they are not even skilled sometimes. They have experience, not degree or something like that, or mainly they are not registered contractors. They are just like a people, small uh, people doing small scale jobs, and basic skills they have. They don't have a specialized skills or something like that. And for that, for example, is like road construction, like people daily wages they require people, and those are like routine road maintenance, labor only subcontracts. This is very important. Sometimes when a bigger company were run out of people or the manpower, they can request the petty contractors to join, or just like they subcontract the work to the petty contractors. The next is small scale contractors. Those are registered contractors. Here, small scale doesn't mean that like I'll come back to small scale a little later. We'll go back to the large scale contractors where the MNCs, they take up a multi billion-dollar projects and world projects and so on in a bigger level. So imagine a 100 crore project or 3,000 crore projects they do. Then those contractors are called large scale contractors, or any contractors that falls between small scale I mean the petty contractors and large scale is called small scale contractors. So there isn't any definite demarcation, but then you can even pretty well know that they're not petty contractors or not large scale contractors. In between, they might be even some small construction company in a location in down south, or even a construction company that are specialized in apartment buildings. They might have done hundreds and hundreds of buildings. Those can everything can be put under small scale contractors. Right. So large scale contractors are like L&Ts. They do multinational projects and also multi-billion projects. Right. So the scale of the projects is pretty heavy and also pretty cumbersome. They need, that's why they prefer large scale contractors, because they have sophisticated instruments and something like that. These are the different types of contracting firms or the contractors. And before we get into the other aspects, let's brush up our memory or brush up our idea or understanding about the organizational processes, right? So in a previous case, in organizational structure, we talk about as a structure, and during that we talked about different functions or different entities or different components. Some of them are like job design, departmentalization, delegation, span of management, and chain of command. So these are the five important organizational processes you need to know to create an organizational structure, right? So the first is the job design. It is just like understanding the job and finding out the right people for the right job. So all those things like advertisement and HR jobs like recruiting, training, and so on. All those things are called job design. So it's a job design. The next is the departmentalization. It is like how you can provide the clusters. If you want to provide a cluster in terms of small or unified clusters, or a single cluster, or a matrix kind of arrangement, all those things are called departmentalization. It is of two types. One is centralized and is called decentralized. Decentralized, all the functions or towards a particular source or something, or a destination or something. But in a decentralized, the authority or the provisions gets transmitted to different things. Say for example, uh, the academic perspective, if you want to have any doubts or clarified, you will generally approach the head of the department. It is just like a centralized one person, right? So or if you want to understand something about the curriculum or something, you might even ask our teams, right? But that's a centralized thing. But if it is a decentralized, like the authority gets shared, so that like for example, if you want to know about your timetable, you don't go to the HOD or the dean directly, but instead you can ask for the explanation, or the your queries gets clarified by the timetable committee. So that's the one function that has people who can take care of that. So that's basically the decentralization. And example of this is in civil engineering is the sewage treatment plant, right? So if all the sewage from a city gets transported to a single location, that's called centralized. But if it is treated individually in intermediate level before going to the final or the main sewage treatment plant, so that's called decentralized. Something like that, right? Or if you have different numbers of sewer treatment plant, you locate it based on the the quantity gets transported. So if a huge quantity gets transported to a single thing, the load will be very heavy. So instead, you can bifurcate the sewages to a different location where the treatment plants are available based on the logic or transportation cost, or the way in which it gets treated or something like that, right? So that's pretty much a departmentalization. Then delegation is the transfer of authority. How you gonna transfer the authority? If you want to have a bottom up approach or top down approach, generally it will be a top down approach. The CEO is having the highest power, and it gets shared to different subordinates, and then finally it goes to the site workers and unorganized laborers or something like that, or daily wages. So that's the downward transfer of authority. But sometimes people call upward transfer of authority also, but it's very rare. Say for example, upward transfer of authority is just like military, where the person, the officers go to the site and collect data, and then based on their their surveillance, the office it send it to the office, and based on the severity it gets shared to the people, required people, or the high commission or something, right? So that's gonna be, you cannot call it's an authority, but it's just an, the person who goes to the site gets the clear information. It's something like the other way of a top down approach, right? And sometimes it's in the military also, it's top down approach. The general or the admiral gives the command, and then the officers underneath him will obey the orders and something. So it's uh, more or less like a top down approach in most cases and in most organizations, right? So, and there's something called matrix approach, when which different functions have different managers. Just like in an IT company, the team leads, they have got the different teams, and the leaders are responsible for a particular task. All the teams together to develop the software or the product, right? So as simple as that. So that's basically the delegation. This is in terms of, and span of management is number of people reporting to a manager or a authority or the management itself. Right? So that's what we call a span of management. If 600 people report to a manager, then you see the amount of skills required for the manager will be pretty heavy. If five or six people are reporting to the manager, and the skills, even though the manager requires high competency level, but also the amount of stress or the workload of managers, monitoring six people may not be very high as compared to people monitoring 100 employees or something. Example, the CEO of Google is Sundar Pichai. So underneath him, if you see, there are different people, and if you see one of them manages like 100 people, and if you take that company Google itself, they have a branches worldwide, right? So it's a leading company, and they have got branches worldwide, and see number of people working in that is also pretty heavy, right? That's basically the span of management, right? And then chain of command is how the transfer of authority, which is also delegation, just done. Like if you have a linear authority, like you have to wait till the top person decides, or if you have an intermittent where it's scale up principle, where it gets transferred to different people, and then different people can take a quick decision or something like that. Right? That's something like very much a chain of command. So all these things are required to map the organizational structure. Work specialization is called division of labor, which is just categorizing or fragmenting different jobs in the organization. Say in a construction company, even if in the planning, we might have said like planning will be done by planning engineer, then construction design will be done by structural engineers, and construction by construction engineers. That fragmentation of work or the division of the labor is called work specialization. And as I told you, chain of command, it's just like unbroken line of authority that defines like how one reports to a manager in an organization, right? There are two principles. One is called unity of command and scale up principle. And unity of command is that employees should have one and only one supervisor. Like it just have, if there is something called there is no two boss in rule in an good management or good organization, something, right? So that's called unity of command. And scale up principle is just like having a functional differentiation or demarcation of the work packages or work specialization and organization, where they give for example, in a construction company, the design team have a design head who checks the design, whereas the draftsman have its own head. They does the drafting job and checks that, and both combine and gives a report called design report, and then that gets checked by manager. So it's all like functional department rather than unity of command or the scala. I mean, this is a scala principle rather than unity of command. Authority is just like formal and legitimate right of a manager to make decisions or issue orders and allocate resources to achieve organizational objective. Line authority is a linear authority, just like a conventional authority. The top guy has the highest power, and it goes diminishing. The power of authority gets diminishing, and it goes down. And staff authority is just like maintaining the functional thing. Like for example, in the functional management, talked about staffing, in which you manage people, or how do you manage people, or how do you make use of it. Like for example, HR manager, just the job of training and even recruitment and something like that. So those are functions, and that's a staff authority. No design manager will intervene in the selection of the personas for a job, even though he might give inputs. Like the requirements is like the person should have a well versed in terms of the codal provisions in softwares handling, and also generating manual design, something like that. But he can give that recommendation or something like requirements to the HR manager, but is not involved in the recruitment process most cases. That's what we call a staff authority. And the next we'll talk about functional authority, which is pretty much like a staff authority, but instead of a group of people deciding that, this is a functional group, like a board members. They decide the incentives, the pay, salary hikes, and all, right? So those are called functional authority, right? So management and financial officers sit together and gets the details from the team leaders about the performance of any person, and then they decide the incentive based on that, right? So that's a functional authority. And delegation is the downward transfer of authority from manager to subordinates. Span of control is a pretty much an important thing, which is the number of people or worker or employee reports to one manager, right? Something like that. That's called span of control or span of management. And then we talk about centralized. We have seen the centralized and decentralized. Let's take about the informal organization. This is one of the important thing that is not preventable or not controllable even in most of the organization, which is the informal organization, which is it is not even an organization. It is a group of people join together and they work, or they don't actually intend to work, but their action will be detrimental to the company. So they speak gossips. Sometimes some management scientists also have, or theoreticians also have portrayed that people who pass the buck or the pass the gossips can also be detrimental to the company. So those are called informal organization. And in most cases, it is good for the manager, because there's something called divide and rule. A manager can, if you want to know about a person, he can see and understand from his performance. But if you want to know further whether he is really doing his integrity, to check the measure of his integrity, then he can take any one's employee's help and then ask about the other, and make sure that that does not no does not goes to the ears of the person they are assessing, something like that. So those are the informal organization, and in most cases it is unavoidable and it is unacceptable also. That's why in an Amazon, they if somebody wants to quit the job, they give a 3 month salary, and then they give them the letter. And there's a rule that, or there is something policy that they cannot come back after changing of their mind when they quit. Once they quit, that's it. They cannot work in any of the Amazon companies around the globe. So that's their policy. So which means that they want to have the employee happy, and who are leaving also to happy, and then so they will not again take them, because they already quit, because they quit because they don't want to work in Amazon. So that's something like that. So that's basically the policies. That's why that's one way that Amazon avoids informal organizations of software shipping. And one thing is called grapevine. So informal groups, as I told you, a group of people join together, even a chit chat about wrong about that organization that might be detrimental, or if they're not very happy about their salary package, then they're they always uh, keep their in a mouth, and then they'll always talk about that, and that creates a negative impression amongst the other employees or something like that. And then next is called grapevine. Grapevine is the informal communication, talking about a company perspective to even the in-house persons and also the outside persons. Supposing two competitors, if one company wants to know about the strategy of the other, they might indirectly involve in this, but it's mostly it's illegal and immoral. But then it's just a strategy in most of the company follows. Like they want to break the trade secret. They want to know what happens in that particular company, um, right? So by getting the information on the employee itself, by paying them some benefits or cash or something. So that's informal, and that's basically the grape win. So that's totally unacceptable, right? So these are the some of the important concepts pertaining to the organizational structure and organizational processes.